Hello, and today we have another author interview. This is author interview 4, actually, I believe it is. Possibly 5, I don't know. Anyway, we've got Kevin Eichelberry with us. I got it right, didn't I?
Ikenberry, yeah.
Eichelberry, was right. I said, that's terrible. Right, okay. Whatever way, we've got this lovely man here, and we are going to talk about his books, some short stories, and a few other things as well. Yeah, that's the plan. So, go on then, Kevin. So what do you want to talk about first? What book would you like to talk about? And then we can proceed from there.
All right, let's talk about the first book I wrote. So
perfect.
My debut novel was Sleeper Protocol, and it was published in 2016. It's a story from a soldier from our time who wakes up 300 years in the future without his identity, and he's given 1 year to figure that out, but he also has to figure out if that future world is worth saving.
Okay, I've got a question. Why 1 year?
He's in a process. This project, they call it the Sleeper Project, is designed to genetically recreate soldiers from specifically from the 20th century. This future Earth and what they call the Terran Defense Force have really forgotten to fight because Earth has pretty much become pacifistic. And while it sounds great that we have a utopia, we also have this intergalactic civil war that's on our doorstep. And so we have to reach back into history to the last generations that really fought well. And so they reach back and through some different alien technologies are actually able to create genetic clones of some of these soldiers. There's only about 200 of them that they have viable samples for. And in this process, they have their genetic code that they can actually do the cloning from, but then they have a memory sample from a scan that was done for soldiers in Afghanistan fictionally in 2016. And so they're actually able then with 200 of these samples to merge the two together. And then the process takes time. So it's not something that they come back, they have the clone and they could just put the memory on and click go and it happens. They actually have to have experiences to help generate their memory. And they give them over the course of a year is kind of what the administrative powers that be have said. You have 1 year for this to work, and if it doesn't work, then you have to terminate that subject and start again, because they don't want risky people from the 20th century to pollute their pacifistic utopia.
I like that. That sounds actually quite interesting. So, why would you make a utopia like that? Because the world, the universe is like evolvingly scary. Like, you know, there's meteorites alone that can kill us. Mm-hmm. So basically, you've got to or the character, you're going to die unless you remember stuff. So it puts pressure on him to try and remember. Right. And obviously, I can imagine it'd be quite stressful for the guy.
Mm-hmm. Then you compound the fact that there's a scientist who has been employed specifically to manipulate his emotions, essentially try to get him to fall in love with her in the hope that it will actually help things process faster with his memory. And that, of course, has some significant side effects as well.
Oh, you don't want to mix love into all this stuff. Oh, you had to do that, didn't you?
Then you add that in, and then the third piece of the triangle is that mounted in his neck is a protocol, which is essentially an AI onboard guidance system that's supposed to be helping him through the process. And that has a female persona, and it falls in love with him. So then you have a love triangle that's created, all this other pressure, like you mentioned, that's on him to get all this stuff figured out, and things pretty much unravel quickly. And he's forced to really, delve into who he is and what that means.
Yeah, because he's got a female AI in his head, or mm-hmm. loves him. She's going to get jealous of this other one that he's programmed to fall in love with. Does the one he's fallen in love with, does she initially want something, or is it a one-way thing?
She's pretty clinical about it. She's doing it because that's what she's been to do. But she's developing feelings for him as well. Okay,
so he's got an AI after him. He's after a scientist. There's a great war going on. He's got a year to sort his life out, or he's dead. Wow, you know what? That sounds like chaos, and absolute interesting chaos.
The best stories come from conflict, and there's quite a bit of conflict in this one. So
okay. Can you tell me about the war then, the aliens and what's going on with this war? I don't want to spoil too many spoils, but sure. What you can talk about.
In the first book, the war is really, it's only mentioned. There's like one scene that essentially takes place that shows this alien threat. And they're called the Greys because they believe them to be the typical little gray aliens with the big black eyes, but nobody's ever really seen them. They have interesting technologies. We'll just leave it there. And a lot of them seemingly replicate things from human history. So like old tanks and stuff that have an alien twist put on them. And so at the first book, everything's kind of at arm's length. And then the second book, after the character, his name is Kieran, after Kieran figures out who he is and what he's been brought back to do, he's actually placed into pilot training on Mars. And so he's flying exospheric attack aircraft that they're training to employ against this particular alien force. And so the war becomes a little bit closer there. Book 3, unfortunately, is still up here. I've got too many projects right now in other universes to work on. So it is coming. It's just something that I've got to get a couple other things done before I can actually get back to that. And then you'll see there that the war really, it'll be the first time that you see the alien forces against friendly forces with kind of a combined arms approach. So you'll have the infantry, you'll have the air assets, you'll have tanks, you'll have armor, that sort of stuff. You'll have the ship battles in space. All of that will kind of be part of it.
Oh, that sounds cool. I was going to ask, I don't know if you did say it or not. So they brought all this stuff together and they brought this one guy. Are they other guys? Are they planning on is it like if he's a success, they then will keep bringing more upon? Is that?
Yes. And so in book 2, you actually get the second of the subjects. You get her story.
Okay. Oh, that's quite cool. Okay. Oh, no, I like that. I do. There's another book. Yeah, everyone tells me these good books, and I just want to read them all. And I just don't have time to read them.
I feel your pain. It's the way it goes.
No, there's so many of them, and it drives me mad. Okay, so do you want to talk about some of your short stories now, then?
Okay, so short fiction is kind of where I started as a writer. I'm not one of those people that will tell you that I ever decided I was going to be a writer at an early age. I was told in high school I was a good writer, and again in college, and I did zero with that until one day I had an idea for a book, and I started writing down the notes for it, and I ended up going back and taking a creative writing class, and the instructor asked me why I wasn't published. And so at that point, one of my goals was to start writing short stories. And so the first short story I had published was actually in an Australian magazine called Andromeda Spaceways In-Flight Magazine. I wrote that with a friend of mine. And then I've written about 50, maybe 60 different short stories now, and I've had a bunch of them published in different anthologies. A couple of the latest ones, there's an anthology series called We Dare from Chris Kennedy Publishing that focuses on stories that are supposed to be themes. So in the first one, the theme was augmented humans. And so I actually wrote a short story for that one that ties back to one of my books called Runs in the Family, which is in a similar timeline as the books we were just talking about, the Protocol War, but it's about 50 years earlier than when all that takes place. And at that point, the progression is they're working on imprinting the memory aspect, not necessarily the genetic clone. And so in this case, they have a young woman who has been imprinted with the combat memories of an ancestor who died in 2016, and she's sent off to war to become the warrior that he was. And this particular story, there's a 6-month interlude in the novel, Runs in the Family. So in this interlude period is when this short story that I just had in the first We Dare was actually set. So you get to see her as an armor force commander fighting tanks against this enemy. It's a lot of fun. And then the second one of the We Dare, that was one where the theme was uplifting humanity and positive stories, essentially. And I didn't want to write anything that's in one of my previous universes. And when the call came out for this, I had a story that had an auspicious beginning. As a writer, and you understand this, I know, and other writers will too, there's times when you're writing that you just feel like you suck. Like it's terrible. You can't put words together. You don't feel like you're capable of doing anything in regard to story. You just feel like you're a terrible writer. And I'd gone through a period of this. This was probably, 2013 or 14. I can't remember exactly when it was. But I reached out to a friend of mine, and I said, I'm in this point of time where I feel like I can't do this. And he said, I want you to turn off the computer and write 1,000 words of something that you've never written before and something that you would never write. Because you're a sci-fi guy. Write something completely different and then send it back. I said, okay. So I closed out, opened up a document, and I wrote 1,000 words of a zombie apocalypse story. And because that's something that I would never, I don't watch The Walking Dead. I'm not a fan of the zombie movies and whatever else, but that was my assignment. So I sat down, I wrote 1,000 words. And so I sent it back. I sent this 1,000-word piece back to him. And let's just say he had some rather choice language for me. And so when the call for We Dare came out, I thought about that story. And so I went back to it and expanded it into a full short story. So it's a story of a college athlete, a basketball player, who is in the middle of the big, what we call in the U.S. March Madness, the big college basketball tournament. And he has a chance to win a game, and it's all right there in his hands, and he loses it. He doesn't actually do it. And then after the game, they end up winning the game. But after the game is when this apocalypse essentially begins to take place. And so he then finds his way to a band of people that are trying to make it to the desert Southwest, so like Arizona, Southern California, because the zombies in this little universe don't like heat or light. So they're trying to get someplace where it's hot. And so in the process of his journey, he comes across a little girl. And he's separated from the rest of his group. The rest of his group is killed. And it's just him, and he's trying just himself to get across the Mississippi River to continue the push west. And he comes across a little girl, and he makes the decision to save her. And at the end of the story, I won't spoil it, but at the end of the story, he does something that's really extraordinary. And he's sitting with the little girl thinking, my greatest moment ever, and nobody saw it because he wanted to be the star athlete. And then 3 guys pull up in a truck and are like, damn, dude, that was insane. And then they continue the journey. So it's a lot of fun to write that story too.
Oh, that sounds good. So do you like doing, you've done a lot of short stories. To doing short story, do you want to, I suppose, career-wise, doing novels, I suppose, is also the better thing to do. But do you want to keep doing the short stories?
Absolutely. Yeah. Every once in a while, I mean, I get invitations to anthologies a lot. And I just actually completed a story, since this kind of goes back to something you and I were talking about before we actually started. There's going to be an anthology about sentient tanks, so tanks with artificial intelligence. And I was invited to that anthology, and I just finished the story for it. I turned it in, matter of fact, yesterday. So if there's an anthology that comes along that has the kind of theme that I want, or something I want to explore, and it's a good opportunity, I'll jump on it. Unfortunately, given my writing schedule, there's a lot of things that I do have to turn down. I can't simply do it. I just don't have the bandwidth for it. But excuse me, yeah, some of those anthologies, absolutely. I'll keep writing short stories. And every once in a while, you just have an idea that comes into your head that you have to capture. And it may turn out to be a short story. It could be a novel 10 years down the road, but you still have to get it down and get it out of your head.
No, I agree with you there. All right. So do you want to talk about the newer book that's just come out?
Sure. So the latest book I have that individually is called Fields of Fire. It is in the Four Horsemen universe, which is now 50 books wide from Chris Kennedy Publishing. I'm fortunate to be one of the core authors of the universe. I was brought in after the first 4 books were written by universe creator Mark Wandry and Chris Kennedy. And then the 5th book was an anthology project talking about short stories. And as they were going through the process of building the table of contents for that book, they reached out to Charles Gannon for the foreword. And Chuck he's a prolific author with Baen Books. His Kane Riordan series has been nominated several times for the Nebula Awards. It really is fantastic science fiction. I'd had a chance to meet Chuck that year, and we've become very good friends. And in the process of that forward writing, he sent a note to those guys and said, why don't you consider having Kevin write a story in your anthology? So they sent me the information, and I read through the stuff, and I sat down and wrote a story, and I sent it to him. And I said, is this anywhere close to what you guys like? Because I admitted I had not read the universe at all. I had no really clue what it was. Their Bible documents and information gave me kind of an idea of where I wanted to go. And so I chose to write about a mercenary company that's in the process of getting screwed over, and they run across a peacemaker, one of the law enforcement in this future universe. And so I sent the story in, and I got an email about 3 hours later from Chris Kennedy that said, "Can you write a book?" And the answer to that question is always yes. So I wrote the novel Peacemaker, and which follows the first human peacemaker, Jessica Francis, and her mission to actually be vested in the Peacemaker Guild and whatever. And then that turned into writing 2 more books, and now I'm curating a series called Rise of the Peacemakers in the universe itself. It's hard to believe it's only been about 3 years since Peacemaker was released, because I've done, six books and a couple of books that I've co-authored now in the universe as well with other folks. So
you're being busy, very busy.
Very busy, but it's also been one of those life-changing opportunities. And to think we went from having just these 5 or 6 books released to now that those are over 50. We now have an international fan organization called the Mercenary Guild Association that has like something over 1,000 members on pretty much every continent. It's just fantastic.
It's I didn't realize, because obviously there's so many books out there. Like you can't follow everything. And when I spoke to was it Tim? Yeah, Tim. I think it was Tim. Oh, he's going to kill me if I go wrong. Tim. And then like when he said about that, and then like this entire universe is huge, and like I just can't believe it,
Nobody expected it to really blow up like it has. And I mean, I'd be the first to tell you that I'll write a book, sure, and then write 2 more books. And now things were gaining steam, and it's crazy how much it's grown. And I'm thrilled to be a part of it. And we've got a whole group of authors that have written in there. I think the total count of authors who've written short stories and novels is like 100 different people now. It's rapidly continuing to expand. We're working on a couple of additional storylines. We've got a whole idea of what the next series will be. It's really a lot of fun to work this through.
No, it's not. It's huge universe. So like what you can do in that, and because there's not like major like you can't do this, can't do that. It's quite, as long as you follow all these few things, go. It's just the doors, windows, and everything's open. There's no boundaries. There's
billions of stories in any created universe, so it really gives us the opportunity to explore different things. And then we have the capability of being reactive to fans, because like every time we do an anthology, there's usually a spot in an anthology for an unpublished author, so someone who has never been published before, who wants to write a story, and if it's got the right bones, if you will, we get them edited and we help them with the stories, and then they're published. And some of those have become books, and there's some that will become books out of the later anthologies that we've done, because they're great stories, and the fans ultimately say, I want to see more about that. And then we go back to that person, kind of like they did with me, and can you write a book? And again, the answer is always yes.
Yes.
So there's a lot of fun stuff still to come. It's great to be a part of.
No, that's amazing. No, that's just really, really good, that is. So are there any, or what are your next projects for yourself? What have you got brewing on your mind that you want to do?
So I'm in the process right now. I'm working on a couple of different things. One of the first ones it's due in December is my contribution to the second season, is what we're calling it, of the Lost Soldiers. That comes from Charles Gannon's books. It's a group of soldiers that have been stolen through time, basically mostly a 20th century, from 1930 to around 1999. And these soldiers are put forward in the future for nefarious purposes. Well, Chuck's main protagonist, Kane Riordan, discovers them and kind of liberates them from what they were doing, but then he can't take them with him where he's going. So he leaves them with a mission to essentially hold a safe point back in known space. And these are not the best soldiers. But anyway, it's just so it's not the best soldiers that are left behind to do these missions. And so we just finished what we call the first season. And that's Chuck is writing. We're basically putting all this together in one big novel, but they came out as individual novellas. And so we had 6 different stories in the first season, written by Mike Massa, myself. I wrote the second one, Griffin Barber, then Casey Azell, and Chris Kennedy, and Mark Wandry. And actually, I got Chris and Mark reversed there at the end. Chris is the last story. But then Chuck is working on the intermingling pieces that will actually make this one large novel that will come out. And so now we're picking up what we call season 2, a couple of months after the ending results of what happens in the first book, as the mission kind of changes. And these soldiers are realizing that while they may not have been the best soldiers from their own time, they're actually fairly capable folks, and they're going to do some great things in the universe.
Cool. That's, all these stories, they all sound amazing. Oh. Right, okay. Now, do you want to talk about your writing? Because you teach.
I do.
Oh, interesting. Go. Tell me about yourself, or tell people who are going to be watching you, what it is that you do.
So, like I said before, I was never one of those people that said I was going to be a writer. And when I went through the process of writing that very first book, the first manuscript I ever wrote, it took me 18 months to write. And it was a mess. I had no idea of story structure, character development. I thought I knew what I was doing because I was a huge science fiction fan, and I'd been a voracious reader all my life. So I thought I could do it. And at the end of that first book, I realized, okay, this is my novel, this is my manuscript, but I don't think it'll ever be publishable. And I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman by the name of Lou Anders. And Lou was, at that time, the editorial director at Pyre Books. And I pitched the manuscript to him as a book. And of course, he asked to see it, then turned it down. But in the process of thinking about the idea for the second book that I ever wrote, which ended up becoming Sleeper Protocol, I decided I was going to do it differently. I was going to sit down. I was actually going to map things out. So I was scheduled, this was October of 2012. I had foot surgery. And so I literally was going to be on my butt for 4 weeks. And so I thought, what a perfect time to sit down and actually get started on this. And so a couple of days after surgery, I set myself up. I had my laptop, and I opened Microsoft Word and I flipped it over to outline mode, thinking, man, I got this. I'm going to outline this book. And I sat there and I watched the blinking cursor of doom for like 2 minutes, and I couldn't do it. And so I chickened out. I closed it. I opened up Facebook like everybody does. And it ended up being serendipitous because Lou had just posted a link to a podcast where they were talking about story structure. And so I went and I listened to that podcast, and I came back and I wrote a 12-page outline in about 3 hours. But it was different than the outlining process and the story structure that Lou had always talked about, what he called Hollywood formula. And so I went back the next day, I listened to that podcast, and I wrote another outline. And I recognized that there was a difference between the two. One of them was really good about pacing, moving the story literally from place to place to place. And the other one was really good about connecting the audience emotionally to the reader, or to the characters. And so I actually sent Lou an email and said, I couldn't agree more with what you've said, because the two of these, there's such a difference. They need to be merged. There needs to be a better way to do this. And I'm really interested in this because I'm trying to outline my next book. And to my surprise, he not only answered back, but we ended up talking on a daily basis for about 6 weeks. And he really taught me a lot about character development and story structure. And so one of the things that I did out of all of that process was I developed classes now that I teach to other writers on story structure and on character development, and how, outlining in writing has a bad name with some people. So there's people that we call them pantsers. They write off the seat of their pants, and they just come up with a story out of their brain. And then you have other people that write very detailed, like 30,000 word outlines. And the reality is, you already have a pretty good understanding of story. If you've ever watched a movie or a television show and you've thought what's going to happen next, and it actually happens, you understand the story structure, and you understand the beats that are necessary and things that move the story forward. And so what I try to do is break down a lot of that for people to understand. A lot of the story structures that you see marketed nowadays, here's my new story structure class, they're all the same thing. They literally have a lot of the same components. Now, some are different and they're presented in different contexts, but there's a very good number of them that are the exact same thing. Some of them go into more detail about one thing or another, but the core element.
To the core, yeah.
Yeah, the core is all the same thing. And that's one of the things that I found that really hangs up writers, really makes them stop and pause, because they know that in story structure, they should do this thing next. And yet there's all this other conflicting information that gets in the way. They don't understand how they get from where they're at in the story to the next thing. And usually it's something very simple. And almost always it deals with the character and themselves reacting to something in the universe that you're writing. So that's kind of one of the things that I do is teach those classes. And I teach them online through a couple of different ways. There's information on my website about them as well, which we can talk later about that. But it's just something that I enjoy doing. And it changed the way that I wrote. It changed my career. I mean, I went from writing an 18-month-long slog of a manuscript that was virtually unpublishable into selling my first novel and having a career as a novelist now. So there's something to it.
So are you actually full-time doing this now? Is this what you do?
No, actually I am not. I'm close to a point where I could, but because of my career in the Army and the things that I did, I've accepted a job and continue to work on a daily basis with that. Mainly from the standpoint of I still enjoy doing it. It gives me the opportunity to work with soldiers, which is something that I dearly miss from my time in the service. So as long as I continue to enjoy that, I'll keep doing that. But the goal is full time, and I'm tantalizingly close to that now.
So how do you sort your schedule out and scheduling and stuff like that regarding, obviously, you're still working and doing this and fitting and...
So one of the benefits of coming to writing late in life is that I started writing when one of our kids was very, very young. And so I would write after bedtime. So I basically set myself down 8 or 9 o'clock at night after everybody went to bed, and I would write 2,000 words. That was always my goal. So my primary writing time is still at night, but I've been working on different things, different techniques to give me a little bit more leverage in the word count area. One of the things I've been doing lately is dictating. So I have an audio recorder, and when I'm driving in my car from my house to my office, I actually will dictate. I'll just ramble out the story, and then I'll come home and I'll plug it into the computer, and it will transcribe it. And of course, it's not great. It doesn't get everything perfect. It doesn't add the right punctuation.
You've still got stuff down though. That's the thing, and you can work on that.
Exactly. So you get the bones out, and then you're able to come in later when you sit down and do your edit, and you can fill in the punctuations, you can correct the words, and then you can add a little bit more context, because when you're driving, you're paying attention to what's going on around you. When you're sitting down at a keyboard or writing, most of the time that's when you really are getting an idea of what the scene is that you're trying to create. So you'll miss things in dictation, like sensory items, the smells, the tastes, the sights, to a certain extent. So you can get a chance to get all those back in there too, and it really makes the process easier.
Yeah, when I'm driving, I'm always thinking about my little stories and stuff, that my little universe in my head. But I always have such good ideas because I'm really good at sort of seeing the road, doing it, but being completely away with the fairies. But like I have these really cool ideas. I think I need really good. And sometimes I've quickly driven. I'm just like on the side of the car, I've written like a name and something just on the side of the car, just like I must remember that. Yeah. Like, I have thought about that myself, because there's this other program that some other guys use. I've seen Scott Moon talk about it, and there's another guy. I think it was I can't remember who it was now. Well, anyway, you talk to it on your phone, same sort of thing, and then it translates it down. I can't remember what it's called.
There's a bunch of them now. I mean, it's just whatever is going to be the right fit for you.
Yeah. No, I have thought about that. I don't know. Maybe all this fancy stuff for writing is just an excuse not to write sometimes. Oh, I get this stuff right. Oh, I get that. I can write. It's like, just put the keyboard and do it. I was going to ask, have you done a co-written book? Did you say earlier? How did you find doing that, sharing your stories and working and trying to delegate jobs to each other? And how did you find that whole process?
The two that I've co-written at this point, the books wise, I follow the same format that I did in that very first short story that I had published. It was a co-written project, and that kind of set the way that I do this when I look at collaborations, because in that particular story, my friend Pete Alden sent me the story. He said, I've written 1,500 words of something, and I think there's something else there, but I don't know what to do next. Will you take a look at it? And so he sent me this. I read the story, and as soon as I got done reading, I started writing on top of it. So I added about 2,000 words, and I sent it back to him, and he added, and so forth and so on. With the novels, it's always good. I firmly believe in doing at least some little bit of plotting and understanding where the story needs to go. And so I sat down with both of the co-authors, Kevin Steverson and Quincy Allen, and we just kind of mapped out the story. Here's what we want to have happen by the end, and here's where the characters are going to start in the beginning. So how do we get them there? Who are the people they're interacting with? What are the things that they're going to have? What are the challenges that they're going to face? And be able to do it that way. One of those projects, Enforcer with Quincy Allen, was we diligently outlined. We really had an idea of where we wanted to go. And then on the flip side of that, Redacted Affairs with Kevin Steverson, we basically freeform wrote that. We had the idea where we wanted to go, and there were certain things and points where it was, hey, we're having a lot of fun with this, but we need this to happen now. As far as
we got to go this way. We have to.
Exactly. I know we're trying. We're going. Yeah, we got to make a report for it. But in both cases, it was a great process because everybody was on board. Everybody knew what they needed to do, and the big thing was if we had problems, either if I had a problem with something that they had written, or likewise. It was, all right, let's take a minute and talk about this. Where are you going with this? Because I liked this, but I didn't like this. And then it's just being flexible, and it's understanding, you are not the greatest writer to ever live. And your ideas sometimes, while they may sound cool to you, it might not actually work, and you need to go back and revise those.
That's it. It always sounds good in your head, and you get attached to some ideas. It's really good. You get passionate about it, but in the end, it might not be that good of an idea. It's kind of one of those things that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. The term is killing your darlings. You have the ideas in your head that this is the best thing ever, and when it comes down to an editor or another writer who's had more experience, and they say, no, you really need to.
No, I completely understand that. So, is there anything else you would like to talk about that we haven't covered?
I think that the other thing I would talk about as far as writers are concerned is don't be afraid to push your own envelope and write something that's totally different. I fell into writing sci-fi and military science fiction because that's kind of where my reading habits always gravitated towards. But on the flip side of that, I've also written a couple of things that were one that's a modern day thriller, and then one that's a thriller kind of twisting, turning crime story in space called Super Sync.
Yes, we'll talk about that. I remember that. It'll come back to me. Talk about that. Go.
So one of my literary heroes, writing science fiction, you always have the same group of the pantheon of writers. But when I was, probably in my 30s, I discovered Elmore Leonard. And Elmore Leonard was a great American crime novelist who had a unique way of writing where he would actually take you first page and drop you into the middle of a situation. And you had to figure out who the main character was. And then as the things went on, if you liked them or not. And it was really, he's a fantastic writer. And he wrote a lot of movies, a lot of books that became movies. Be Cool, Get Shorty, Out of Sight, Jackie Brown, which was directed by Quentin Tarantino. It's a fantastic movie. And he also really got his start writing Westerns. So like the old movie 3:10 to Yuma, Elmore Leonard wrote that as a short story. So he has a very different style of writing. And I had always hoped when I became a writer, I started going to conventions and having appearances and stuff, that I'd really get the opportunity to meet him. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. And when he passed away, I decided that I wanted to write a tribute. I wanted to try to write an Elmore Leonard novel in space. And so I took this concept of a salvage crew. It's been hired to go out into high Earth orbit and retrieve old satellites for money. And they have some differences, some history, and they have a different idea of what the prize could be. So the story twists and turns. And I've been told it actually has a couple of surprises that really got people that they didn't expect them to happen. So I think it was successful to write an homage to Elmore Leonard like that way. And it was a lot of fun for me to write. So I think I'm going to do something with maybe a sequel to it here fairly soon.
I was about to say, have you got any plans to follow on or do anything else different than what you usually do then?
Yeah, I've got that in mind. Working on a new potential shared universe idea right now that could be a lot of fun to work on. I do want to write more modern day thriller work too, because there's a lot of fun to be done with that. and do it in a little bit different way. Have your protagonist being someone that has to figure things out about their own lives, not necessarily be the end all be all sort of character we see in some of those movies and books nowadays. So kind of the up and coming aspect of how they do that. So there's always new things on the horizon, and I look forward to all those different projects as much as I can.
It's so busy. I was going to say, it's time. It's just we don't have enough time in a day to achieve any the goals you want to do, and then you get tired. You have to sleep. Why do we need to sleep? Come on, we could just hours.
It's really it's time management. That it's also you kind of strike while the iron is hot too. So if you've got the idea that you're working on and it's really clear in your head, you go and you focus on that for a little while, because the one that you've been laboring over and sweating for the last 6 months, you're going to come back to and you're going to be able to finish it. But it's being able to just keep your brain active and thinking about those hot new ideas while you can.
So I had a couple of little ideas. I thought, that's quite good. I've got an idea list. I put it in my idea list, and I had a look at it yesterday, and I thought, I can't remember what that was. Like, I should have put more detail into what the idea was. I just sort of, I know the time was good because I was laying in bed, and I think about the stuff. And I thought, it's really good. So I'm like trying to find my phone, putting it in there and that, and yeah.
You never know when those ideas are gonna manifest and have an opportunity to become something. Years ago, we were driving across Kansas in the United States, and Kansas is like this. It's perfectly flat, but it's also right in the center of Tornado Alley, so you get a lot of big thunderstorms and that sort of thing out there. And we're driving across, and there's a thunderstorm off to the north, up in the Nebraska line area, and I had this idea, those guys that jump out of they look like the squirrel suits, right? And they do the flying around.
Yeah.
So I had this idea of, man, what would it be like for one of those guys to jump into a tornado? And so I completely just, it was one of those things, okay, yeah, all right. Nice little idea. It doesn't really have a chance to become anything. And then I got invited to submit to an anthology called Extreme Planets. And I had this idea for these ginormous storms. And there's a guy who's a daredevil scientist who actually has done that on Earth. And he's recruited to go and do this on one of these extra, solar planets. And it was a lot of fun to write. So you never know when the idea is gonna come back and get you years down the road.
Do you know the thing is, though, there are people that if they could do that on another planet on a real big thing and they could survive it, or there's a chance they could survive it, they would do it. Absolutely. There are crazy. I'm sure someone has done. Someone must have done it. Whether they've actually survived or not, I don't know.
I don't know either. And I am by no means endorsing this as something.
Disclaimer: please don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't try this at home.
You know what they could do? Like, 'cause you know how we in space we slingshot around like the moon or anything that's got like a bit of gravity pull to launch us. They could like glide to a tornado, catch it, sling, just go. Because you're like.
Yeah, I think it's great. I don't know if I would ever condone that in real life.
You're going to get an email, like the police talk. Right, you're telling people about slingshot. Oh, I love it.
Idea.
It's a fictional idea. Don't do it. Oh, I love it. Right. I've done my list now. Have you got anything else you want to talk about? Is there anything? Are you happy?
I love what I do now.
Yeah.
It's something I never expected to do, and it's been incredibly rewarding in different ways. I mean, it's fun to be able to write and say that you've published a novel and whatever else, but I love hearing back from readers. I love getting the random folks that come up to me at conventions and go, "Oh, I love this book, and here's why." And I had a young lady who dressed up as my character Jessica Francis at DragonCon a couple of years ago. And that was probably one of the most heart-stopping moments. Was really, really pretty amazing. So
for someone to actually be one of your characters, you've reached out to a few people to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
no, that's really good. That's an achievement. That is. Well done.
It is, and it's the days when the words don't come easy. It's still you still have to do it because you've got people out there that want to hear more of the story and they want to know what's next, and it's your job to give them what's next.
Now, how do you with that, how do you feel knowing that you don't need to, because in the end it's your life, you know what I mean? But how do you feel that little bit of pressure, even though it's probably a small amount at the moment, but if you got more famous, how do you feel with that, knowing that there's people who really want you to do what you're doing?
I think that this is going to sound crazy, but I think where most of the people get the idea of the pressure of the writer is that they want to see what happens next to a particular character. And people have in mind what they think should happen with a character over the course of time. And they get really attached to that. I'm attached to my characters as a writer, and I want to make sure that I'm telling the right story for those characters. And there are times when things change. And you make a decision as a writer that might actually rile fans up. It might make them a little bit angry at you. But you do it, and it's not something you do in a cavalier way. You do it in very, very responsibly. And my latest book, Fields of Fire, I kill off a character who's become, she's not a main character, but she's a beloved character. And because she's very different than the others of her species that we meet through the course of the Four Horsemen universe. And I got to this point in the story, and I had an idea in my head of where I thought what things needed to go. And I was in the middle of writing, and it completely stopped me when the idea came in that you need to kill her off. And here's why. And it wasn't that I needed to do this for this big shocking moment. It was, I'm doing this now because in the next book or two, it's going to have a further effect down the road that has an even larger effect. So it serves a purpose. But it was something that for me, I did that, and I thought, do I do this? And so I wrote it up, and I broke that chapter out, and I sent it to my first reader, and I said, I need you to read this. I need you to read this right now, because I don't know. And they were like, go. And
it's going to hit people, but it's going to hit people in a good way.
Well, it does. And it's funny because one of the people that had the worst response to it was my own father. Why? I can't believe you did that. How did you do that? That was terrible. And he was mad at me for about a week.
And he's the only one who can get to you as well. Like the fans, you know what I mean? They might be somewhere else. He come knocking at your door. Why? What are you doing?
Exactly. So, yeah, that was kind of funny. But yeah, as far as dealing with the pressure, it's always there now because you have something that's out there that people enjoy, and I just try to focus on telling the best story. And undoubtedly, 20 years down the road, somebody will come up to me and say, how you ended that series, I didn't really like. Well, you know what? That was how the ending came out of my head. We all have stories that we've seen, movies or books or whatever else that I would do that differently, and that's human nature. And so the best part I can do is write the best story I can.
No, I'm with you on that, and I've said it in other videos and stuff. I thoroughly believe you should kill characters off. Like, I don't like you're invincible. It takes away. It just takes away any. Care I've got for someone.
Yeah.
I know nothing's going to happen to them. There's no damage. Like, they might emotionally have issues. Like, if someone else dies too, then they might be affected. But if I know their lives are going to be safe, plot's going to save them, I kind of get a bit sort of detached because I've got no feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big avid kill your main characters off. Do it.
Yeah, and your other main characters, even if it's somebody like James Bond, you're not going to kill off Bond, right? But you're going to have effects on those closest to him. And, the movie Skyfall was tremendous. In my opinion, it's one of the best Bond movies that's been made because Bond's connection with M over time, he goes from hating her to messing with her to, you understand really at the end of Skyfall, he loves her. And she is like the mom he never had. And they have that relationship. And with her death in Skyfall, the emotional punch of that movie was huge. It really was.
No, I'm with you on that, and because that's if you can't kill a main character off because you need them for a few more books or something, and there's a reason to it. Build up some other people who people like, and they get another bit of connection to them. Kill that person off, and how that affects your main character, and that gives you doors again, open doors, and then you feel more to your character because he's just lost someone who means something to you as a reader, so you could feel why he's upset or she's upset or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm completely on that. Yeah.
And you see how it affects, like you said, that's so critical. How it affects that main character.
No, I'm completely for that. I do. Right. Okay. What else you got? You got anything else for us, or are you happy? What you got? I'm keep talking. I'm happy to keep going.
We could probably talk for a long time, but no, I'm online. So kevinikenberry.com is my
Tell us
website.
everything. Where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Amazon. I'm on Twitter at the writer Ike. I don't do a whole lot with Twitter these days.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I just launched a Patreon. So if you're familiar with the Patreon platform, I do things in advance for supporters there, early chapters, character sketches, that sort of stuff. That's kind of brand new. So it's only something I've been doing about a month now. So there's a lot more to come with that. New books coming, new anthology appearances. I'll probably have at least one more book completed by the end of this year. So we'll see where things go.
I will put the links and all the information in this. I'll message you after this and we'll get all the information.
Sure.
So they can all find you, everything. Right. Okay. Well, that's that. Hope everyone enjoyed the interview. I've enjoyed it. I've had fun. I love it. More books I've got to read and buy now. It just drives me mad. Right. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Right. I'm going to close this down now. Right. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye. I almost forget something in this corner. There we go. Here we go. Right, we're live. Okay, now got to remember this. Right. Hello. Oh no, that's what I wasn't going to say. Yeah.
There's soldiers that.
Oh, you're frozen. Oh no! What happened?
They are.
Oh, hang on. You froze. You completely froze on me.
I don't know what that was. I saw it on my end too. Both of us froze.
I was like, oh, you're gone. Right.
So
you know, go on. Sorry.